Give it a second. All right, good evening. Welcome to yet another weekly forum with Smartkarma. Today with me, I've got David Blennerhassett, who's dialed in from Hong Kong. David's one of our esteemed insight providers, and David focuses on very quirky, relative value, special situations, and sort of a lot of out of the ordinary type stuff. But we'll get to that in a second. As is sort of standard policy, I'm going to quickly run over our disclaimer. The forum is strictly for subscribers. It's meant purely for informational purposes. Do not treat it as investment advice. It's the opinion of our insight providers, not of Smartkarma. And lastly, Chatham House rule applies to this forum and all Smartkarma webinars for that matter. So please do not share any of this on social media or any other public forum without express permission. Also, while we're just waiting for more attendees to stream in, just a very, very brief recap of some of our more recent forums. I try and do that just to give you guys a sense of the breadth of ideas that we're exploring in these sessions, and also how we structure each one of these sessions. So last week, for instance, we started off by looking at Siloam International Hospital. It's one of the leading hospital chains in Indonesia, a company that's perpetually not been able to make profit, but certain things have changed. And this business is now starting to generate pretty decent returns. Then we veered course and we looked at Grab, and with Grab, it's certainly all about their big SPAC listing. It's actually something that David has written about as well on the platform. And then in our thematic section, we took a look at how do some of these Chinese ADRs stack up. This is like 2 weeks past the Archegos blow off. The week prior, we looked at Sinotrans, which had been an idea we explored, sort of mid 2020. The name has doubled, but the prospects are getting even better. Their first quarter profit outlook is about 300% year-on-year growth. It's still on 5 times PE and below book, and it's about to spin off some of its real estate assets. Then in the large cap land, we looked at 2 ideas, Xiaomi as well as Tencent Music, both stocks that have been out of favor for a while, and now there are reasons to be looking at them. And then in the thematic section, we looked at carbon markets. So you'll notice a pattern. We always start off by looking at a small size company in the region where there's something interesting going on. And we showcase these almost as case studies, where you get to hear from analysts on, what could be a potential investment thesis, or perhaps sometimes what's gone wrong with an investment thesis. Then we always look at a large cap, and with large caps, our focus always is to, really find out what is mean variant. What are we saying, or what are our insight providers saying that's very, very different from the view in the market? And then we typically also explore some sort of an interesting theme, whether it's the hydrogen economy or carbon markets or positioning in a particular sector. Now, with that in mind, I'll just run you guys over the agenda for today and kind of the reason why David's with us. So there are 2 things that we're going to be looking at together with David. First, we will be looking at a Hong Kong monopoly called TVB, which is, I think, down more than 80% in the last 5 to 6 years. And we're going to sort of explore what happened and what could happen. Then in our thematic section, we're going to look at, I guess, something that's been brewing for a while, land appropriation and the concept of eminent domain. These are very sort of interesting concepts to explore, especially as one can say there's been a bit of a regime change in Hong Kong. And then lastly, I'm going to, I know David's chuckling that, but lastly, I'm going to take a very brief look at Toshiba. I will try my level best to summarize what has been nothing short of a very dramatic 2 weeks in Toshiba, and there's been a ton of coverage on this situation on the platform too. So without further ado, David, welcome.
Okay, thanks Raj. Let me launch into it with TVB. As you mentioned, This is the free-to-air broadcasting TV company in Hong Kong. Has about a market cap of about $500 million. It's got a lot of hair in this company. I'll try and keep it quick and not too nuanced. About a decade ago, the founder, Run Shaw, sold about 26% of his stake to a company called Young Lion that was partly owned by one of the CEOs, Charles Chan, and a couple other people. And in about 2015, 2016, a PRC media mogul, Li Ruogang, bought into Young Lion. I'll touch on that a little while because it's quite important. In 2016, TVB issued about $500 million of notes. This was in October, and about 3 months later, it then turned around and decided to do a buyback. That buyback was worth, not surprisingly, about $500 million. It was a complicated buyback, not a partial offer. It was so nuanced that the SFC sent it to the takeovers panel. Takeovers panel thought that needed to be structured this way. It went to the courts. The courts overruled the panel. Eventually, the deal didn't go through. It actually lapsed only because under the takeovers panel, they looked into the structure of Young Lion and realized there was some stuff that wasn't made public. The Communication Authority had to sort of step in. And basically, the Communication Authority hadn't made a decision by the time that 1 year was up for the partial offer or the buyback, and that was lapsed. So moving on, since then, the broadcasting or the Communication Authority actually ruled on the structure of Young Lion. That was about 2019, around the same time that the company had bought into a theatre company. There's bonds, they blew up. Charles Chan, the CEO, stepped down last year. The CEO, Mark Poe, resigned last week. And out of all this, Li Ruogang, who actually controls Young Lion, controls 22.1% now, 26% previously. He's gone on record saying that TVB needs to have like a radical reform. He respects the ordinance, the broadcasting ordinance, but he reckons that they've been a passive investor for so long that something needs to change. Otherwise, it's going to basically die. I think it's worth, with the broadcasting ordinance, what's important here, Li Ruogang is a PRC national. So he's what's called an unqualified voting controller, and basically a non-Hong Kong resident. And so in Hong Kong, only people, if you own more than 2%, 6%, 10% by a non-resident Hong Kong shareholder, you need authority to do so, or approval from the Communication Authority. Now, I would argue right now, the way things have transformed in this town, that what would be deemed a non-Hong Kong resident now. We are all part of China. I think that with a stroke of a pen, Carrie Lam could actually just change the ordinance itself and actually give Li Ruogang a chance to actually just go carte blanche and basically increase his stake. Now, he's obviously a multi-billionaire and he's got his sights set on the company. He has a plan. And I think that also we take a step back and you look at how it would probably give him good kudos with the powers that be, being a wealthy mainlander taking over a media company in Hong Kong. We've seen this with sort of Jack Ma and Alibaba taking over South China Morning Post. CITIC privatized Asia Satellite a few years ago. I think actually Hong Kong Telecom 6823 is probably next on the rank also. What can Ruogang do about TVB? It's difficult to really see how he can completely sort of turn this stock around, what sort of magic he can actually inject into the company itself. But clearly he wants to sort of maybe go up to about 50%. I don't think he can take full control. There's a couple of very sticky investors on the shareholder registry. But it's one of those things that I think if he's given this green light, and I think with the stroke of a pen that Carrie Lam really could just give him the go-ahead, then this thing could probably pop. Very much on sentiment, maybe not on the economics, so that's still to be ironed out. And I think in a sense, it is already in place. We can just take it very quickly that for the first time in 50 years, TVB is not going to be showing the Oscars in Hong Kong, and that's obviously followed after China said they won't show the Oscars either, and that's probably because of a short documentary on Hong Kong. So in effect, there is all that controls already in place. And I think maybe we should just put it in writing if that is the case and let Li Ruogang take over up to about 50%. That's why I suspect it's going to probably happen. certainly, maybe not this year, but certainly within the next 18 months or so. Lee Rugang wants to list CMC, his media company, which is worth about $6 billion based on 2018 money that he raised. And I think he wants to sort of sort out this TVB issue before that company is actually raised. TVB, yeah, it's a $500 million market cap. It's got about 3.5 billion Hong Kong dollars of cash when short-term investments, and it's probably net cash of about 0.4 billion Hong Kong dollars. It looks interesting, and I think it's a very hairy situation, but it's just so beaten up. And as Raj says, it was off about 80% from its high. So that's one of the things I'm sort of looking at the moment.
So David, I know that there is just so much to chew on here, right? But I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions, which will probably require you to sort of again revisit some of what you just said, but just to structure it a little bit, right? So you mentioned TVB is the free-to-air broadcaster in Hong Kong. Would it be fair to say it's a monopoly or a quasi-monopoly in that respect?
Oh, it's a total monopoly. There used to be another free-to-air broadcasting company in Hong Kong, but that fell by the wayside. I mean, TVB has always been the majority player in this town, and now it is actually just pure monopoly. It used to be like a duopoly at best.
Got it.
But I mean, it's one of those things. It's almost like a legacy sort of situation. I'm not sure about you guys or people listening in. Last time you used terrestrial sort of TV station as opposed to using some sort of internet or Netflix or what have you. I've had the TVB in my apartment for a dozen years and haven't looked at it.
Yeah. Well, we are starting to notice content from TVB now showing up on some of the streaming platforms. Even sort of Netflix in Singapore has some TVB shows on it. Not many, but we can see some of the content library of TVB now making its way to some of these OTT platforms. So I think you went over the quick history, but again, if I have to summarize, there's probably been 3 big chapters, right? The first was the Run Shaw chapter. I think he died close to the age of 100, built this giant media empire. Celebrities flocked around him and around TVB. And then there was the sort of second transitory empire, right, where Charles took over. And then beyond that, if I'm right in saying there's now the third saga, right, which is when a mainland Chinese billionaire owns a big stake. Am I right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. I think Lee Rugang has pretty much been pulling the string behind the scenes since Charles sort of stepped it up. Even though Mark Poe stepped down last week, I think Lee Rugang has really been given the structure of Young Lion into TVB. I would say that he's been the mainstay since probably about 2016.
Got it. Right. And then you explained that a few years ago they were trying to do a $500 million buyback, which was sort of kind of exciting till people realized the buyback can't go forward because of some real technicalities.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
And these technicalities, if you were to just sort of summarize, what was the sort of crux of why the buyback couldn't happen?
Well, it is twofold. One of them was that whenever you do a buyback and it could trigger a general offer, you can seek a waiver from the SFC, and that waiver is usually interconditional between the SFC approving it, as long as you get a simple majority vote from independent shareholders also approving it. Now, the panel decided to make a slightly sort of different arrangement because the way they looked at independent sort of shareholders and the way the structure is, how the voting works for non-regulated sort of shareholders into TVB to sort of do away with the interconditionality. And as long as all shareholders voted on the offer itself and not that, and of course that was what went to court. But the main thing was that when the panel was digging into all this and they asked for further information, Young Lion, they actually came across dual class shareholding into Young Lion and then into TVB, and ultimately trying who was pulling the string behind Young Lion. And they dug up some information that they believe that the Communication Authority didn't actually have at the time of 2016 and 2015 when Lee Rugang actually entered the scene. And that was submitted to the Communication Authority to get their assessment of like, what should they do? Should he sell down, or are you happy with the situation, or what? And in the end, after 28 months of actually laboring over that process, they went, you know what, we didn't know about it, but we're going to leave it as it is. By then, the offer had lapsed.
Got it. So this was, this buyback was roughly, give or take, 30 Hong Kong dollars. And if we look at the share price now, we're at about 10. So we're again sort of 60% lower than when they were trying to buy back stock, a decent amount of stock a few years ago. So that's interesting. So, just if we were to look at just the history of where the stock has been, where there has been intent to take over or buy back, we're a lot lower than that. I think you also mentioned that from a balance sheet risk perspective, it's pretty much net cash. So we're not looking at a margin call or a leverage situation per se. And then lastly, the crux, sort of what could happen now, it's basically Li Rugang thinking about sorting out his holding and his future holding in TVB ahead of listing his own media company, CMC, in 18 months.
Yeah, that's right. And I think he's probably going to try and leverage some of his CMC sort of content maybe across the border that he controls, and maybe selling that into TVB and making money from that. And perhaps that's the whole sort of deal that he but until he actually has carte blanche over the company, I'm guessing that just hasn't taken effect. But that probably is what he's trying to seek to do.
David, also from sort of my memory of Hong Kong and where TVB is, is TVB around Discovery Bay area? Is that right?
No, it's not. Oh, you mean where it's located, the actual office?
Yes.
I'm going to say I've been there once, like in Chun Kwan O, but I mean, someone's really going to correct me if they listen to this. I've only been there once to actually visit their things. I'm pretty sure it's off like Chun Kwan O. So if you near the old airport, if anyone knows where Hong Kong is.
Right. Well, I've been thinking, and perhaps this is a follow-up for later, but I'm wondering if these guys own any hidden real estate assets on the book, because from my past recollection, I think they had like very nice facilities where the studios were. And that could be a really good real estate to look at. But again, that's a follow-up. Look, one thing for listeners, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask at any given point of time. You don't have to wait for us to finish. We're just going to keep going on otherwise. And with that, I will move on to sort of the next section while David's still with us. And this is again something that David's been writing on quite a bit. It's the topic of extraordinary land appropriation in Hong Kong. And as you've noticed, David tends to dig deep into situations that are a bit tricky. And I think this one is as well. So David, if it's cool, maybe I'm just going to ask you questions. And
that might work out better. Yeah, I might waffle on too much otherwise, yeah.
So, just first things first, right? So when it comes to Hong Kong land, who actually owns most of the land in Hong Kong?
Well, you can say the Hong Kong government does, which is obviously the Chinese government. All the land, or 1,100 square kilometers of it, except for the St. John's Cathedral, which is a freehold land, so long as it's a church, which is one of those great little nuances. And of course, the US consulate that way, has got a 999 a year lease. That's the only two. Everything else is like under a 75 to 99 year lease, and after 97, most of the leases come up for about 50 years because the 2047 sort of 50 year sort of handover stage.
Right. Now, in your insights on the platform on this topic, you've mentioned this phrase, eminent domain, right? Now, it's a fun term. I often see it coming up in some sort of, legal shows on TV, but what is eminent domain actually, and how does this sort of come into picture in this conversation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, you've got to try and get the heading to get people to sort of read it, but and I'm not trying to be sensationalistic. I think there may be something here, but basically, it means that it's the power of the government to take control of private property and convert it to public use. And usually, they can only do that if they can provide some sort of compensation for the property owners. It could also be called expropriation too. That's what eminent domain means.
Got it. And another sort of phrase that keeps cropping up in your research on this topic is the Bauhinia Party, right?
Right.
So who are they? What's sort of briefly their background and agenda?
Yeah, I mean they're okay. So they established it probably about March last year, 2020. And by three gentlemen who apparently are mainland Chinese executives who spent some time in Hong Kong and also studied overseas. They are very much a pro-Beijing political party, and what is understood to have very close connections to Beijing's authorities. There is absolutely nothing to go on their website. So there's a bit of smoke and mirrors there. From my understanding, though, these guys, I wouldn't go so far as to say they're a mouthpiece, but I think when they came out with a discussion paper last week, which I think might be your next question, I don't know. And I just think you can't be discounted what they're saying, and whether that's it is maybe indirectly what is coming down from the higher up authorities.
Got it. So yeah, exactly my question, right? So they put out this internal discussion paper, which, got some airtime. In essence, what were they putting across? What was the key message in this discussion paper?
Yeah, I mean, it was leaked, or maybe it was deliberately leaked, who's to say? But really, they talked about how the widening gap between rich and the poor, which is obviously, in Hong Kong, it's got some of the most expensive housing prices in the world for umpteen years in a row. And they were saying that this is causing social unrest, threatening the security of the one country sort of system, and that the paper went on to say that central government has the right to coordinate the supply of land in Hong Kong. Now, security in Hong Kong are really the go-to catchphrases in this city at the moment. So that's why when you sort of see something like the security of this in Hong Kong, yeah, I'm disinclined to not ignore it, with double negatives there. So,
yeah, I hear you.
It goes another diesel, but that's the crux of what they say.
Yep. And this is, I mean, since I've been looking at Hong Kong, kind of mid 2000s, the issue of farmland and kind of land bank that's sitting with some of the developers has sort of come up repeatedly, right? So there have been some, I guess, previous attempts, but not so much towards driving equality. But I guess what have been some of these previous events, and what seems to be a little bit different now?
Yeah, okay. So on the farmland, there's probably about 50 square kilometers of farmland out there. And that's only about 4.5% of the total land area, but around 84 companies really control around about 20% of that farmland, and especially people like Henderson and New World. So the government's tried things like a pilot scheme for arbitration, and whereby you try to expedite the land supply for housing and other uses by getting the property developers to sort of highlight maybe a particular area of property which has been rezoned, and then you go into an arbitration process to how much the government will pay you for for that bit of land. And it's a totally tortuous sort of process, in terms of the size of the land and the plot ratio therein. And of course, once you enter arbitration, that's it. You have to go through it. You're committed to converting. So there's been very little cases. Henderson's done a little bit here and there. I mean, back in 2019, New World donated some land. The heading was 3 million square feet, but when you read into it, it was only probably about 28,000 square feet. And of course, that's also problematic because they bought the land using shareholder money because it's a listed company. So donating land is actually a breach of fiduciary duty. And then you have other things like like what's called the Lands Resumption Ordinance, which is basically something that the government uses for resuming the acquisition of private land for public purposes, but they need to sort of justify what the public purpose is, and then the definition of that is somewhat opaque also. But it just needs to sort of be proven that it's in the broader Hong Kong's interest to doing so. But again, it's very much a 2-step forwards, 1 step back, or at best. So a lot of this stuff, it just sort of sits on there, and so these property developers just sits on this land, and and they manipulate the prices as and when they see fit, and that's been the way it's been for a long time.
Right. And I guess it's no secret, Hong Kong's got one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. I love that little joke you had in your insight as well, right? Why can't Hong Kong housing be affordable? And the guy says, it is affordable, it's just you can't afford it. So, that's been the case for a long time now. So I guess sort of the multi-million-dollar question is, so what, right? And let's say the motivation of the Bauhinia party is coming from up top. This has been leaked intentionally. So what? What is the impact on this now?
Well, I mean, the idea that you can appropriate land would just go against the basic law, the protection of a private property. But things have been changing very quickly in this town, and I'm very close to the action. And so I don't think anything can really be completely ruled out. And making property more affordable to the masses probably will put a smile on people's faces in Hong Kong, one that's probably overdue. How they would go about doing it, look, it's difficult to say, but I just can't rule out that there may be, what they've done in the past is clearly not working. So what can they do to actually maybe move ahead and actually try to commandeer some of this land and build some properties for people? So this is what I'm trying to flag, and people like Henderson, who's sitting on the biggest chunk of farmland, perhaps is in their crosshairs.
Understood. Okay, I think this is one of those issues that can sort of bubble along for a while and then just suddenly explode one day. But I think this is a very, very interesting theme to be looking at. I think for the last many years, even on Smartkarma, we've been talking about the sort of relevance of Hong Kong vis-a-vis China and other big cities in China, and how that is changing and evolving. And again, some of the social issues that have crept on and become very important in, say, 2018, 2019, I think all bleed into this sort of thematic. So David, thank you so much for shedding some light on it. I know these are very, very complex issues, and sort of boiling them down into like 5 or 10 minutes, it's very, very hard, but thank you for making an attempt.
No problem.
I'm going to let you run. If there are any questions that come along later, I will post them as discussions on the platform, and cool. You can then take a look. Thank you, sir. Take care.
Thanks, mate. See you later. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Okay, well, that was David. It's always nice talking to David, and I tend to have conversations that are longer than normal with him, because he's got a wealth of knowledge up there, which comes out as you sort of quiz him more and more. But I'm going to now swiftly move along to the final discussion for today. And this is the sort of large cap section, and we're going to briefly talk about Toshiba Corp. This is 6502 JP. It's an $18 billion company. It's a very, very important company in Japan, because it has many, many businesses underneath it, and some of those businesses are linked to the government, they're linked to the military, they're linked to the semiconductor supply chain, a lot of the things that are now very strategic in today's day and age. Again, this is a very, very interesting situation and very close to heart at Smartkarma. Now, some of you might not look at the Japanese market, so look at this as a bit of a case study, where I'm going to run you through the type of very unique work that we bring about on the platform. So first things first, about 2 weeks ago, around the 13th of April, there was a rumor that there will be a $20 billion buyout of this company. Now, a $20 billion buyout is an enormous buyout. There aren't too many private equity deals of that size that happen in the Asian markets. At around the same time, an activist investor based in Singapore called 3D Capital started to also make a bit of noise around the situation. Broadly speaking, the sort of governance of Toshiba had become of a governance nightmare. There were a lot of practices that were going on that just did not seem right in this day and age of ESG, and given some of the stewardship concerns that are being raised in Japan at the moment. Now, as details started to emerge, it turned out that CVC, which is a big private equity firm, who had previously hired Kuramatani-san, the CEO, they were stepping up to the plate for this buyout. Now, a year ago, pretty much exactly a year ago, Smartkarma had actually started writing a bunch of research talking about how Kuramatani-san was seeking an MBO partner so that he could be the master of his own castle, right? So this has really been a control issue for at least a year. Now, as I mentioned, Toshiba is a very unique company because it has a defense and electronic systems business that's linked straight to the Japanese national security. They also have a business called Kioxia, which is a semiconductor business that's also a very sensitive area in terms of foreign control. So CVC now, which is sort of a quasi-foreign private equity firm, buying out Toshiba just raised a lot of eyebrows, right? And around this issue, what I want to show you is, if you just look at it, this is literally just a screenshot from Google News. You will, and here I've just searched for Toshiba Smartkarma. I think if you go back, pretty much all the press coverage on Toshiba in the last couple of weeks has centered around the research and insight that has come from the Smartkarma platform. So what Smartkarma started to talk about is that this particular leader's shenanigans, so Kuramatani-san's shenanigans, have now caught up to him, and that he would be replaced. And that's exactly what transpired, right? Kuramatani-san was asked to leave. Sunakawa-san was brought in to replace him. This is a positive for Toshiba's long-term outlook. Now, the interesting thing was that Kuramatani-san had been appointed in by CVC, right, a while back. So it also meant that CVC's offer was going to go. Now, the market panicked a little bit. The stock came off a little bit. But once again, independent research providers on our platform were saying that, worry not, right? If CVC backs out, there will be new bidders. This is a very important deal. And just days after, KKR and Brookfield were rumored to have come up. It's now quite likely that there will be an offer at a guaranteed price that would save minority shareholders a lot of time. Oasis Management, which is an activist hedge fund, they threw out a number of about 6,200 yen in terms of the buyout price. And Toshiba right now is at about 4,400 yen. So this is a fair bit above. And they said that seems to be the fair value for us. That does not seem unreasonable. Now, we do think it can go a little bit further, especially if Kyoshia is IPO'd first. It could go up to 8,000 yen, and that would include a 20% control premium. So what I'm trying to describe here is a very, very significant M&A transaction in the region, which has largely manifested and grown in accordance with insights that we were putting up as long as a year ago. And then pretty much all the news flow in all the major newspapers, right, from Bloomberg to Reuters to whatever else, are now being driven around the insight from our platform. So we're really sort of influencing and moving markets here. And that is the power of the network that we bring to the table. These are not always situations that we're going to look at, but ever so often there will be large situations in your backyard, in your home markets, that are going to be driven entirely off of the insight on the platform. And this is just one such example. With that, I'm sort of done with today's presentation. I must admit, we've picked up some fairly difficult topics for today, right? We went over TVB, which has been a highly complex situation of control in Hong Kong. We looked at eminent domain and how property ownership itself in Hong Kong might not mean what it does today and the impact it might have on the property developers going forward. And then we also spent time looking at a really large and significant buyout offer, right? Okay, I've got a question here that I'm going to look at, and this is not based on any of the topics today, which is fine. Let me just read it. It said, regarding your thematic investment where you raised telcos as a sector of interest, do you have any outlook update on Singtel given recent news around, number one, Gulf Energy offer to buy it by associates, and number two, sale of its Aussie towers, and three, new corporate structure? Lots of moving parts here, as the question itself alludes to. And we'll sort of look at this one by one. What's happening in Thailand with InTouch and Advance is really quite interesting, especially that we've got an energy company that's looking to buy out a telco. Like, to me, if you take a step back, that itself is so interesting. It tells you that there is strategic intent around telcos at the moment. And that's the case that we were making a few weeks ago, right? That telcos are actually so beaten up, yet so interesting given the recurring nature of the revenues and the impending 5G cycle, that you have, even energy companies now looking at buying them, right? So that fits in, right? Secondly, I think what's quite interesting is that, it's still not a done deal. Gulf has actually come up with sort of two offers. Both of these are, one is at the InTouch level, one is at the Advanced level. Of course, from a share price perspective, it's a positive for Singtel. Whether Singtel sells to Gulf, it remains to be seen, because these assets are quite strategic to Singtel. They fit in its regional empire. So that's, but in any case, right, it's an uplift to the NAV. Sale of Aussie Telecom Towers. Look, sale of assets such as towers has been a great strategy for a lot of telcos to unlock value. And what do they do when they unlock value? They do capital management, right? They do buybacks, or they return money back to shareholders. And that's a bit of a trend that we're seeing now with some of the other Temasek linked companies as well. So we would not be surprised if, under the new management team that's taken over Singtel recently, some of this really starts to materialize. New corporate structure at Bharti Airtel, I guess not so much, but Singtel did pick up more stake in Bharti at the right time of the cycle. So from that perspective, it looks good. Now, we did discuss that if you want exposure to reopening or the 5G space, StarHub gives you more leverage and more upside potentially versus Singtel. Singtel, the investment thesis revolves a lot more around what they do with their corporate structure and what they do around capital management. So hopefully that sort of covers some of these things. It's great that you guys are looking closely at telcos. I think we will revisit this theme, and we'll speak a little bit more about some of these ideas. Okay, the next question I've got is on Cromwell REIT. This was also a topic from a maybe a couple of months ago, I think from Feb. The question is, there was recently an announcement of consolidation of the units just after the placement. Does it affect the free float and inclusion? I do not know what you mean by consolidation of the units. Perhaps you can sort of explain what you mean. I think all the announcements since the placement have been pretty much procedural, talking about where those shares have gone. So maybe just post a discussion on the platform so we have more clarity of what you're about. But Cromwell is quite interesting. If we take a look, post the placement, which had been very nicely highlighted in the forum and also on the webinar that we held with the management, Simon Garrick, Cromwell had fallen to about 43 cents, and this is euro cents. So let's just go back 3 months, right? So Cromwell had fallen to about 43 cents. It was an accretive acquisition that they were funding. And since then, Cromwell has sort of ratcheted back up to about 47, 48 cents. I think, this is still a very, very compelling level, because this is one of the highest yielding REITs in Singapore. The index inclusion catalysts are still very much ahead of us, not behind us. The asset base of the company has grown. This is now, getting closer and closer to that $2 billion mark. So again, hopefully this answers your question. I'll also highlight that you can actually contact the investor relations teams of some of these companies on the platform. So if you want to ask the company a question, you can press this contact IR button and message the COO or even the CEO for that matter, right? Sometimes they might take a little while to respond, but that facility is available to investors who use Smartkarma. All right, fantastic. If there are no further questions, actually, someone has posted this announcement, so we will take a look at it, and then we will post a discussion around this on the platform to clarify. Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. We've dragged on for 10 minutes longer than usual, but thank you for your questions, and speak to you next week. Bye-bye.